My name is Claire, and on the night I turned 18, my parents taught me what they called my first real lesson about adulthood. They just didn't realize it would be the last lesson I ever accepted from them. If you had walked past our dining room window that evening, you might have thought it was a normal family dinner. The table was set properly, matching plates, folded napkins, water glasses aligned like someone had measured the distance between them. My mother had even lit the overhead chandelier, the one she usually saved for holidays or when guests came over. That should have been my first warning. There was no cake, no candles, no awkward off-key singing. Just 3 chairs, 3 plates, and a silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. "I made roast chicken," my mother said, sitting down. Her voice was calm, almost formal. "Your favorite. It used to be, anyway." My father cleared his throat and adjusted his chair. He wore the same expression he used when he was about to give one of his long lectures, chin lifted slightly, shoulders squared, hands folded on the table like he was about to negotiate something important. I remember thinking, this feels more like a meeting than a birthday. I had spent the day at school pretending not to care. No party, no friends over. My parents had always believed birthdays were unnecessary distractions. "Life doesn't stop to celebrate you," my father liked to say. Why should we? Still, I had assumed dinner meant something. A card, maybe. A quiet acknowledgement that I'd survived 18 years under their roof without completely disappointing them. We ate in near silence. The clink of cutlery sounded too loud. My mother asked about my plans after graduation, even though she already knew the answer. Community college applications submitted. Part-time job lined up at a local store. No gap year. No dreams that required money or permission. I had learned early which ambitions were acceptable. Halfway through the meal, my father pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked out of the dining room without a word. I looked at my mother, confused. "He'll be right back," she said, taking a sip of water. When he returned, he wasn't empty-handed. He dragged a suitcase behind him. It was old, scuffed at the corners. One of the zippers didn't quite close all the way. I recognized it immediately. It had been sitting in the hall closet for years, only used when relatives visited. I had never seen it packed before. My father placed it beside my chair, carefully, like he was setting down something fragile. "For you," he said. I stared at it, waiting for the punchline. "What is this?" My mother folded her napkin and set it on the table. Her hands were steady, too steady. "It's time," she said. "You're 18 now." The words landed wrong, not celebratory, not proud, final. My father nodded. "We believe in teaching responsibility early. The world doesn't coddle you, Claire. Neither will we." I laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Okay, but what's the suitcase for?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was evaluating whether I was ready to hear the truth. "You're moving out," he said, "tonight." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. What? I pushed my chair back slightly. "Is this a joke?" My mother shook her head. "This is a life lesson, one you'll thank us for someday." I looked from one face to the other, waiting for someone to crack, to soften, to tell me I'd misunderstood. No one did. "You've been fed, housed, educated," my father continued. "From now on, you learn to stand on your own. That's how strong adults are made." My throat tightened. "Where am I supposed to go?" He shrugged. "You'll figure it out." My mother stood up and opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes. Not all of them, just enough to look intentional. My birth certificate, my social security card, a toothbrush. No money, no note, no phone call warning. This wasn't spontaneous. They had planned this. I realized then that this dinner wasn't about celebrating my birth. It was about ending my childhood. And as I sat there, staring at the suitcase they had packed for me, one thought echoed louder than anything else. They weren't pushing me forward. They were pushing me out. I didn't leave the house right away. Not because I refused, but because my body wouldn't move. I sat there, staring at the suitcase at my feet, trying to understand how a birthday dinner had turned into an eviction notice. My parents waited. They didn't rush me. They didn't comfort me either. They watched the way people watch a clock tick toward a deadline they've already accepted. Where am I supposed to go? I asked again, my voice quieter this time. My father leaned back in his chair. That's part of the lesson. My mother nodded, as if this were something we'd all agreed on. Life doesn't hand you instructions, Claire. You have to learn by doing. I looked at her hands. She had folded them neatly in her lap. No shaking. No hesitation. If this hurt her, she didn't let it show. I don't have money, I said. I don't have a place. You have a phone. My father cut in. You have legs. You have a brain. You'll manage. Manage. It was a word they loved. Manage your time. Manage your attitude. Manage your expectations. They used it the way other parents used words like support or help. My mother stood and walked toward the hallway. I packed the essentials, she said over her shoulder. You don't need much to start out. Too much comfort makes people weak. She disappeared for a moment and came back with my jacket draped over her arm. She placed it on the back of my chair like she was doing me a favor. There, she said. You're ready. I felt something crack in my chest. You're serious, I whispered. My father met my eyes. Completely. I waited for something, anything, that suggested this was a test. That if I begged or cried or promised to work harder, they'd stop. Nothing came. Instead, my father stood and picked up the suitcase, placing the handle in my hand. His grip lingered for half a second, then released. Out by 9, he said, glancing at the clock on the wall. We don't want this dragging on. Dragging on. Like my presence was a chore. I stood up on unsteady legs. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound echoing through the dining room. My mother flinched at the noise, then quickly composed herself. You'll thank us one day, she said, softer now. This is how you build character. I wanted to scream that character shouldn't come from abandonment, that independence shouldn't start on a sidewalk with nowhere to go, but the words stuck in my throat, tangled with disbelief and shame. I walked toward the front door, suitcase bumping against my knee with every step. The house felt different already, less like home, more like a place I was trespassing. At the door, I hesitated. I don't know what I expected. A last-minute hug, a reminder that I could call, a deadline, a condition. Instead, my father opened the door for me. Cold air rushed in. Night had already settled over the street, quiet and ordinary. Porch lights glowed up and down the block. Somewhere nearby, a television laughed. Someone else's normal life continued without interruption. This isn't punishment, my mother said from behind me. It's love. I turned back then, really looked at them. At the people who had raised me, fed me, taught me to tie my shoes and do my homework, and who now stood in a warm house telling themselves this was kindness. If something happens to me, I said carefully, will you help? My father didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was firm. You'll learn faster if you don't rely on us. That was my answer. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click. No slam, no drama, just the sound of a choice being completed. I stood on the porch for a moment, gripping the suitcase, staring at the door like it might open again if I waited long enough. It didn't. So I walked down the steps, past the mailbox, onto the sidewalk where my childhood officially ended. Not with freedom, but with nowhere to go. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. Inside, my parents went back to their dinner. And just like that, at 18 years old, I learned what their version of love looked like. A lesson delivered cold, packaged neatly, and handed to me with a suitcase. The first night taught me something quickly. Freedom is expensive when you don't choose it. I walked for almost an hour before my legs started to shake. Before my legs started to shake. I hadn't planned where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay still. Standing on that sidewalk felt too close to turning around, and turning around felt like surrendering to a door that had already closed. The neighborhood thinned into darker streets. Storefronts went from open to shuttered. My phone buzzed once. No message, just a low battery warning. I slipped it back into my pocket like it had betrayed me. Around midnight, I sat on a bus stop bench and opened the suitcase for the first time. Clothes folded with military precision, socks paired. A sweater I didn't like but wore anyway because my mother said it was practical. My documents were tucked into a plastic folder as if identity was enough to survive on. No cash, no note. I stared at the papers longer than I should have. Name, date of birth. Proof that I existed. None of it told me where to sleep. I texted 3 people I knew from school. 2 didn't reply. 1 did, apologizing, saying their parents wouldn't allow it. I typed, "I understand," and meant it, because understanding had always been my job. I spent that night awake, curled on the bench with the suitcase hugged to my chest like it could keep me warm. Every passing car made me tense. Every footstep sounded like danger. I learned quickly how loud the world is when no one is responsible for you. In the morning, I washed my face in a gas station bathroom and stared at my reflection. I looked the same. Same eyes, same mouth. But something behind them had shifted, like a door in my head had locked itself. I got a job 2 days later, part-time, underpaid, grateful to have it. I slept on couches until I ran out of invitations. Then I slept less. I learned which corners were safe and which ones weren't. I learned how to eat slowly so hunger lasted longer. I learned how to say I'm fine without anyone questioning it. I didn't call my parents. Not once. Pride played a part, but fear played a bigger one. I was terrified that if I heard their voices, I'd beg. And I knew, deep down, that begging wouldn't change anything. They had wanted me to figure it out, so I did. Weeks blurred into months. Survival became routine. Routine became habit. And habit became something close to strength, even if it was built on exhaustion. Sometimes, late at night, I remembered the suitcase being set beside my chair. How calm they had looked. How sure. That memory hardened into something solid inside me. No one was coming. And once I accepted that, I stopped waiting to be saved. I started building a life that didn't require permission. That was the moment I stopped being their child, not because they asked me to leave, but because I learned how to stay standing when no one was watching. By the time I turned 21, survival no longer felt like an emergency. It felt like maintenance. I had a routine. Wake up early, work long shifts, save what little I could, spend nothing I didn't absolutely need. I rented a tiny room above a nail salon. 1 window, 1 bed, 1 desk I'd found by a dumpster and wiped clean with disinfectant and hope. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I enrolled in night classes at a community college, paying 1 course at a time. Progress was slow, but it was real. Every grade I passed felt heavier than a certificate. Proof that I hadn't been erased just because someone decided I was expendable. People sometimes asked about my parents. I learned to answer without flinching. "We're not close," I'd say. Or, "I've been on my own for a while." No drama, no explanations, just facts. What surprised me most wasn't how hard it was to build a life alone. It was how easy it was for them to disappear from it. They never called. Not on my 19th birthday. Not when I moved. Not when I started school. No messages asking if I was safe. No awkward apologies. No curiosity about whether their lesson had worked or broken something permanently. At first, that hurt more than being kicked out. Because being thrown out was a decision. Being forgotten felt like confirmation. I stopped checking my phone for their names. Stopped wondering if today would be the day they realized what they'd done. The space they left behind didn't stay empty for long. It filled with work schedules, deadlines, small victories, quiet nights where I fell asleep without fear. I learned how to budget, how to cook cheap meals that lasted days, how to walk into a room and not shrink. Independence, I realized, wasn't the dramatic moment they'd forced on me. It was boring, repetitive, earned slowly. Sometimes, when I passed families in grocery stores, parents arguing over cereal brands, kids begging for snacks, I felt a sharp, unexpected pang. Not jealousy, something quieter. Grief for a version of family I never really had. But grief didn't stop me anymore. By 23, I had a better job. Not glamorous, but stable. I paid my own bills. I had my own keys. I had a small savings account that made me feel richer than I'd ever imagined. I had built all of this without them. And that was when I stopped thinking of myself as someone they had pushed out and started seeing myself as someone they had lost. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere beyond my carefully constructed life, their certainty was cracking. The same people who had told me the world wouldn't protect me were about to learn what it feels like when no one comes to help. And this time, they were the ones reaching out into the silence. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were boring, predictable, safe. I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car with the windows cracked, eating rice from a plastic container and scrolling through emails I'd already answered. When my phone lit up with my mother's name, I thought it was a mistake. For a second, I honestly believed it had to be spam. Some glitch pulling an old contact I'd never bothered to delete. That's how far away they were from my daily life. I let it ring once, twice. On the third ring, I answered. Hello? There was a pause, breathing on the other end. Uneven. Older than I remembered. Dear Claire? Hearing my name in her voice did something strange to my chest. Not warmth, not relief, just pressure. Like an old bruise being pressed to see if it still hurt. Yes, I said. What is it? She didn't answer right away. I heard shuffling, the faint sound of something being moved. Papers, maybe. Or furniture. Your father isn't well, she said finally. The words landed, but they didn't explode the way movies make you think they should. No dramatic music, no collapse, just information. What kind of not well? I asked. Another pause. He lost his job last year. The company downsized. We thought it would be temporary, but... Her voice cracked just slightly. Things have been hard. The same word they'd used when they told me the world wouldn't be gentle. She kept talking, faster now, like she was afraid I'd hang up if she stopped. The mortgage fell behind. Medical bills added up. We had to sell the house. We're renting now, but even that... She swallowed. We're running out of options. I leaned back against the car seat and stared at the steering wheel. My hands were steady. That surprised me. And, I said, there it was, the sound of hope slipping in. And we thought, maybe you could help. Just for a little while. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exact. The timing, the phrasing, the expectation that family suddenly meant something again. You taught me to be independent, I said slowly. Remember? Silence. That was different, she replied too quickly. You were young. This is family. Family. The word felt foreign now, like a language I used to speak but had forgotten. Did you call to ask how I am? I asked. She hesitated. Claire, did you call on my birthdays? I continued. Any of them? Another pause. Longer this time. No, she admitted. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then don't rewrite the story now. Her breath hitched. We made you strong. That one hurt. Not because it was cruel, but because it was convenient. You made me alone, I said. Strength came later. She started to cry then. Quietly. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that expects comfort. We wouldn't ask if we had another choice, she whispered. I thought about the suitcase. The front door closing. The way they'd gone back to their dinner. You did have another choice, I said. Years ago. The line went quiet. I didn't hang up immediately. I didn't need to. The conversation had already ended where it mattered. I hope things work out, I said at last. And I meant it. Just not the way she wanted. When I ended the call, my lunch had gone cold. The car felt too small, but inside me, something was perfectly clear. The lesson they had given me had come full circle, and this time, I was the one who understood it best. I didn't see them right away after that call, not because I needed time to think, but because my answer was already there, sitting quietly inside me, fully formed. What I needed was time to accept that choosing myself no longer felt like rebellion. It felt normal. They asked to meet a week later. My mother framed it carefully. Neutral place, just to talk. No pressure. She even added, "We're proud of how far you've come," like that erased the years of silence. We met at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. I arrived early out of habit and chose a table near the window. Old instincts die hard. You always pick the seat where you can see exits when you've spent years not knowing where you'll sleep. They came together. My father looked thinner, smaller, not fragile, but worn, like a man who had finally learned that control doesn't protect you from consequences. My mother's hair was streaked with gray she hadn't bothered to hide. They smiled when they saw me, careful smiles, hopeful. "Claire," my mother said, reaching out like she might hug me. I stepped back. That was the first boundary. We sat, ordered coffee, spoke about the weather, about traffic, about nothing. The small talk felt like scaffolding, temporary, shaky, meant to hold up a conversation that didn't want to stand. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We didn't come here to argue," he said. "I know," I replied. "You came to ask." He nodded. "We need help." There it was. Simple, direct. No metaphors this time. I looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Do you remember my 18th birthday?" They exchanged a glance. "Of course," my mother said quickly. "We remember." I tilted my head. "Then describe it." Silence. My father stared into his coffee. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. "That's what I thought," I said gently. "You remember the idea of it, not the reality." Her voice trembled. "We were trying to prepare you for life." "You prepared me," I agreed. "Just not the way you think." I told them about the bench, the job, the nights I'd gone to sleep hungry. Not to punish them, but because truth matters when people try to rewrite history. My father flinched. "We didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't ask," I replied. He nodded once. That was the closest thing to accountability I was going to get. "So," my mother said softly, "can you help us?" I folded my hands on the table. "No," the word didn't shake. Her face collapsed. "But you can. You're stable. You've done well." "I have," I said, "because I learned something important." I met their eyes, one after the other. "Independence doesn't mean abandoning people when they need help," I said. "It means choosing who you're responsible for." My father's jaw tightened. "So you're just going to walk away?" I smiled, not cruelly, but clearly. "No," I said. "I walked away years ago. You just didn't notice." We finished our coffee in silence. When we stood to leave, my mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. In a way, she was. As I walked out into the sunlight, I felt something settle into place. Solid, irreversible. They had taught me how to survive without a safety net. They just never expected to be standing under the same sky, asking for one. I didn't hear from them again after that meeting. No follow-up messages, no angry calls, no attempts to guilt me into changing my mind. Just silence. At first, I wondered if they were waiting, giving me time to feel bad, to second-guess myself, to come back softened by nostalgia or obligation. That had always been their strategy before. Let the quiet do the work. Let discomfort turn into compliance. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt final, Life didn't dramatically improve or fall apart after that cafe conversation. It simply continued. I went to work, paid my bills, cooked dinner, slept in my own bed. The ordinary things I'd built slowly, deliberately, without help. And for the first time, I noticed something strange. I wasn't carrying them with me anymore. Months later, I heard updates through distant relatives. My father's health stabilized, but never fully recovered. My mother took a part-time job she complained about constantly. They moved again. Smaller place, fewer comforts, no room for pride. People said things like, "They're struggling," in the same sympathetic tone they'd once used about me. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel guilt either. What I felt was recognition. This was the world they had prepared me for. Unforgiving, practical, uninterested in your intentions. The same world they had insisted would teach me everything I needed to know. They just hadn't expected to be students in it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that suitcase. How ordinary it was. How carefully packed. How confidently it had been handed to me like a gift instead of a goodbye. They had believed that pushing me out would make me stronger, because they never imagined strength could include walking away from them. That was their mistake. Independence isn't cruelty. It isn't revenge. It isn't shutting doors out of anger. Real independence is knowing when to stop reopening doors that only ever led to the same room. I didn't become successful out of spite. I didn't build my life to prove them wrong. I did it because survival demanded focus, and focus doesn't leave room for resentment forever. There was a time when I thought forgiveness meant reconciliation. That maturity meant letting people back in once they apologized, or once enough time had passed. Now I know better. Forgiveness can be quiet. It can be distant. It can exist without access. I forgave them the moment I stopped needing them to understand. The last time I saw my parents was from across a grocery store aisle, almost a year after our meeting. They didn't see me. They were arguing softly over prices, calculating, adjusting. Smaller than I remembered. Not weak. Just human in a way they'd never allowed themselves to be before. I stood there for a moment, unseen, and realized something important. If I walked up to them, they would see me as an opportunity. If I stayed where I was, I remained a person. So I turned my cart around and left. Years ago, on my 18th birthday, they told me the world wouldn't protect me, that no one would catch me if I fell, that life was harsh, and lessons were best learned the hard way. They were right about one thing. The world doesn't protect you, but it also doesn't demand loyalty from people who broke you and called it love. They taught me independence by force. I learned it by necessity. And in the end, the lesson they were so proud of giving me became the one thing I couldn't give back to them. Because the child they pushed out grew up, and the adult they created finally understood that survival is not the same as responsibility. That was the real lesson, and this time, it wasn't mine to learn.